patent attorney from Fort Wayne.
My name is Lester Brooks. I teach history at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
I'm Tim Moore from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution at the University of Wisconsin. It's great to be here.
And I forgot to say, I'm from, so I know if you can introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Ethan.
Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm John, and our coach is Mr. Umschneider.
Okay, great. And I bet you can't guess exactly what the question is. Question number 2. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? And you may begin.
John Adams wrote in Thoughts on Government that in a large society, it is impossible that the whole populace should assemble to make laws, but should distribute power from the many to a few. Madison argued in Federalist 10 that representational governments limit the impact of factions without sacrificing liberty or forcing homogeneity of thought. As the framers saw it, representative governments harmonize the clashing needs for stable judicious government and unstable, often tactless public opinion.
How representatives should act is complicated. Edmund Burke advocated for a trustee model in which the people elect an official to act on their own judgments and convictions, saying he's not a member of Bristol, he's a member of Parliament. Alternatively, an elective official can become a delegate, acting on the desires of their constituents. In 1812, the Virginia General Assembly wrote that a representative, quote, must be the organ of others. Of who? Not of the nation, but of his constituents, who alone displace him.
George Galloway advocates a politico motto, saying, quote, it is in the nature of the congressman's job that he should determine public opinion in his own constituency and in the whole nation, analyze it, measure in terms of practicability, and consider it in his own knowledge, conscience, and convictions. The politico theory promotes party politics rising through the ranks of parties to seek re-election or higher offices based on their effectiveness at melding these complex tasks.
The number of constituents determines the best model to adopt. In Federalist 50, Madison notes, in all very numerous assemblies of whatever characters compromised, passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Had every Athenian citizen been a Socrates, every Athenian assembly would still have been a mob. When members represent millions of constituents, it's best to rely on a politico system to condense the multitude of opinions. However, in local offices with a few thousand constituents, officials are able to constructively utilize the delegate model.
During the convention, 2 competing plans for representation emerged. The Virginia plan proposed a bicameral legislature with seats allocated based on population. The lower house was selected by the popular vote, while the higher house was elected by the lower. In response, smaller states fell behind the New Jersey plan, which suggested unicameral equal representation selected by state legislatures.
Additionally, the extent of suffrage raised difficult questions. Many delegates did not believe in the common man's ability to elect responsible legislatures. Elbridge Gerry said, quote, in England, the people will probably lose their liberty from the smallness of the proportion having a right of suffrage. Our danger arises from the opposite extreme. This belief stemmed from experience under the Articles, where debtors often voted in representatives that created laws at the expense of creditors, with Madison even saying, quote, the unjust laws of the states had proceeded more from this class of men than any other.
America's system of representation favors a two-party system, of which John Adams wrote that, quote, a division of the republic into 2 great parties is to be dreaded as the great political evil. However, it is not the convention's representational system that is at fault. It is our first past-the-post system for congressional elections. French political scientist Maurice Duverger's law states that simple majority single ballot systems favor a 2-party system, thus producing a 2-party monopoly, strangling third parties with strategic voting. The United States should adopt a system of elections that more accurately represents the American people's opinions.
Proportional representation systems allow for a greater degree of accountability in government, as well as inherently force political parties to collaborate. For example, Germany's electoral system incorporates a direct element via the ballots of candidates for each district and a proportional element via the vote for a national party. In the legislature, half of the seats are allocated based on the national proportional party vote, while the winning candidates from each district fill the other half of the seats. As a result, the German legislature is saturated with various parties representing the broad will of the electorate, and this political diversity fosters coalition building. If the United States embraced a more proportional system like the German model, not only would the legislature be more representative, but issues of legislative gridlock that plague our government today would be more easily resolved. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
Right. Tim, do you want to start?
Absolutely. You've already kind of baited me with Madison's criticisms of debtors and creditors. Other than that, what other issues in the 80s led Madison to such suspicions about state representatives?
Well, there was, from every state, they essentially acted as testing grounds where the convention could see what had worked and what hadn't. And so besides just Madison, there were other delegates as well who were very wary. Elbridge Gerry in particular was really afraid of the people electing their own representatives from his own experience in Massachusetts, where he thought the people had elected corrupt individuals or individuals who just weren't particularly interested in government.
We also see Madison blaming a lot of the failures of the Articles of Confederation on the states themselves having too much power and too much political will over the people. That's why we see in his Virginia plan that it was all based on proportional representation, and he only had to compromise via Sherman's Great Compromise in order to incorporate the other elements.
We also see destructive relationships between state legislators. Just take, for example, Maryland and Virginia, where there was huge disputes over shipping rights. That led to Article 1, Section 8, which gave Congress interstate control of commerce.
Thank you.
Let me jump in here and ask this. Let's say that you have some concerns that are not being met by Congress. Let's say you're part of a group that has concerns and they're not being met by Congress. What do you do next?
Well, there's a couple of different avenues a group could approach. Perhaps the best and most straightforward avenue is to go to your local representative and senators who are supposed to represent you and whose vote and rely on your votes and your fundraising. Particularly for groups that could be linkage institutions, they could have quite a bit of fundraising power to try and at least garner attention for the issue.
Framers also anticipated this issue of congressional failures, I'd say. We see that they protect freedom of speech and freedom of press in the First Amendment. And that was a very important issue we see this past summer with the Black Lives Matter protests and widespread political discourse, good trouble, as the late Senator Lewis would say. But there are other methods of protesting the failures of government.
And also the most fundamental way, if you are not satisfied with your specific congressman or congresswoman, is to just vote them out. In Article 1, Section 2, the Constitution establishes 2-year term limits for the House of Representatives. So a shortened term limit allows for the people to hold the representatives accountable. But even in Article 1, Section 3, which establishes a much more independent, much more deliberative, longer term for the Senate, we see with the passage of the 17th Amendment that allowed the transfer from state legislators to the actual direct election of senators from the people to have more accountability from the citizens.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned the German system. Do you think that to implement that, how would you go about implementing that in the United States?
Well, that's a valid question. Germany has a parliamentary system and we have a presidential system. So obviously we couldn't exactly mirror Germany's proportional representation system, but we can do it at the state level. As outlined in Article 1, Section 4, states are the principal organizers of their own elections. And we've already seen some states implement proportional representation systems. Just take, for example, or at least a form of it. Take Maine, for example, just in a couple years ago, implemented ranked choice voting. So it's definitely feasible, albeit not, we can't exactly mirror the German system, but at the state level, we can totally do it.
I would also advocate for a more realistic system, like I'm implementing the Fair Representation Act, which advocates for multi-party or multi-member representative districts, as well as committees for gerrymandering oversight, as well as the implementation of ranked choice voting, like we've seen in states like Maine, as my colleagues.
Alternatively, if we would be achieved at a more national level, there could be an amendment through the Article 5 of the Constitution, which lays out it could be proposed by 2/3 of each House of Congress and then sent to the states to be ratified by 3/4. And if done so, this could be, beyond just being established at the state level, be a real change in the actual system of elections.
Okay, slow down. Again, let's go back. Let's go back to a slower time, the 18th century. What actually were the anti-federalist criticisms of this viewpoint that Madison has in Fed 10? Why didn't they buy it?
Well, many of the Anti-Federalist concerns about representation was that it's not enough to just rely on civic virtue. Patrick Henry argued that civic virtue is a very weak protection from corruption, and that they should rely more on the delegate model, in which all representatives are tied to their constituents' concerns. And we saw that some of the Federalists actually agreed with this. In Federal 55, Madison argues that the ratio of constituents to representatives should be very low. That's something that Patrick Henry would also agree with. And in Federalist 57, we saw that Madison argued that that wise men and rulers should be the only delegates being used, and that would be something that Patrick Henry would disagree with.
We also do see in some of the anti-federalist writings, such as Brutus I, that they really did want a much smaller, the representatives to follow the constituents incredibly closely on a very local level, instead of the much broader national range. Many anti-federalists simply believe that the national government has had too varied a reach in too many different societies instead of the more homogeneous societies that could be done in local or state government.
Let me ask this. When you look at Congress, does it really reflect the American people? Is it taking everyone into consideration? For example, you're young. Is it taking age into, are your views really represented in Congress today? Lower classes, those impoverished, are they really represented in Congress?
Well, we see with most congressional members that they are likely to be millionaires, they are likely to be white, older men. And part of that, I believe, especially with the age issue, is that my generation, 18 to 26-year-olds, are the least likely to vote. And that's very disheartening, because we are the future of the country, and we don't use our power and use the major way in which we can affect legislation. So I agree with you that it's not representative.
I would also add that, speaking to the lower class aspect, that fundraising is an essential part of Congress at this point in time, especially with the House of Representatives as established in Article 1, Section 2, having elections every 2 years. They're constantly having to fundraise, and congressmen spend up to 40 or more hours a week just calling people and asking for money. And so when money has such a large impact on our elections, it's hard for people without a lot of money to make as much of an impact.
But aside from money, the organization and the more coherent structure of parties today has allowed for more young people to participate. I can only speak from personal experience in my home community of Richmond, but I constantly see more of my peers participating in congressional campaigns, specifically Abigail Spanberger. A lot of people from our school participated in her campaign, and also the rise of social media is another avenue through which young people can hold their Congress representatives accountable and participate in that sphere.
But I would like to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I gave you a round of applause for. Oh,
I mean, as an old white guy, I'm a little nervous, Sam. I'm not a millionaire, so I guess we're safe there. I thought this presentation was really excellent. Not only have you demonstrated history, but you also understand current policy stuff. So I appreciated that. And, the fact that you're tapping into the letter to the Bristol electors, you're mentioning Galloway. I mean, all that gets to the historical piece that I think you've demonstrated quite well. And also, I think, there was one sentence in your 4-minute presentation that was really, really insightful. Numbers dictate which theory we want. Numbers dictate which theory we're going to use, and that sentence really stuck out, and I'm still thinking about that. And I think you're probably right that our preferences are determined by the number of constituents. So yeah, Matt, you understood Madison's concerns about creditors and debtors, and also the Virginia, Maryland discussions over trade on the Potomac. The fact that the Anti-Federalists were concerned about ratios, and how Henry takes the ratios and the wise elites theory representation to task. So I think your history, I mean, as a person that dabbles in this time period every day at work, I'm very impressed with your command of 18th century history. So thank you.
Yeah, I like that introduction. You jumped right on John Adams. We can't get all the people together and compared that to Madison, and his concern over factions. And then you went on to explain Virginia and New Jersey, and I thought you did a really good job with that. I too like that reference to the creditors versus debtors in the 1780s, and that was a huge problem. You brought out civic virtue in one of the follow-up, and how weak it is, and certainly it was crumbling at that time as well. I would say that in reference to my question about where do you go, you made some interesting comments to seek out your representative. You have First Amendment rights, Black Lives Matter, vote the representative out, but you could take it a further step, as suggested in the Declaration of Independence, right? If you're dissatisfied with your government, you can rebel. Certainly the Confederate States of America, they believe that the government wasn't satisfying their concerns, and they took another step as well. So you might want to think in terms of that. But on the whole, very good job, and enjoy talking with you. Best of luck.
Yes, I would echo that. I also kind of enjoyed your comment about the Athenians could still be a mob, even if it's full of people that are Socratic or the philosophers. I enjoyed also the fact that you brought in Germany and how the German system does favor coalition. That was actually designed to force them to be a coalition and enter into coalitions. And I enjoyed your answer to my question about could we incorporate that into the United States? So, or how would you do that? So that was nicely done. It was really a fine job, and I wish we had a lot more time, but we only have 8 minutes, had only 8 minutes. So thank you very much, and I wish you good luck.
Du Verger, du Verger.
Thank you so